I'm here today doing my presentation on comic books and masculinity, and a more specific look at Marvel and DC Comics. The ideal male body and superheroes. So when you imagine a superhero, what does their body look like to you? Are they fat? Are they skinny? Are they out of shape? Or are they extremely muscular? More likely than not, you're imagining somebody who's extremely muscular, probably more muscular than humanly possible. We do not have superheroes that are out of shape or fat or skinny. They are muscular to this amount. At their creation, superheroes were fit, but not necessarily to an abundance. As time went on, you see these superheroes get more and more fit. And as they get more fit, within the 1950s, they're kind of paired with these ads by Charles Atlas, who is a bodybuilder. And they highlighted these male insecurities, telling the weak boy to buy this bodybuilding book to become a new man. Telling them, you need to be muscular to be like these heroes that you idolize. And here, superhero comics have always relied on the notion that a Superman exists inside every man. And while the readers are well aware of this most fundamental convention, they are also aware that several new and incredibly popular comics are erasing the ordinary man underneath in favor of an even more excessively power and one-dimensional masculine ideal. Within the 80s and 90s, you saw a lot of characters just become extremely, extremely muscular. Even those characters that were traditionally smaller became much, much bigger, or much more muscularly defined, such as Spider-Man here. This character is traditionally slim, yet fit. And here you can see his muscles are on top of muscles, and that he is incredibly, incredibly fit. And then you also have characters such as Cable, who are just this hyper masculine ideal where their arms are just bigger than their heads. Their body proportions aren't even possible. This cover here is a more recently running comic within 2019-2020, and you can still see this body that is very, very hyper fit, bodybuilder-esque. And then this next cover I'm about to show you is a little more ludicrous, but is also a very real cover that was out there in the 1990s. And this is Captain America, and just the shape of his body is just impossible. But this is how these characters were drawn, and this is what young readers were seeing and pinpointing with, this is the man, this is the ultimate superhero, so this is what I need to do to be masculine. Paired with that physicality, we also have the violence that superheroes put out. Think about how superheroes defeat their enemies. Are they talking it out? More than likely they are not. Superheroes rarely, if ever, solve their problems with anything but violence. Even the physical violence seen within comics is hyper-violent, with enemies being beaten to a pulp. And even though these enemies would be harmed, this is rarely examined within comics. You see these enemies appear again soon after without any physical harm done to them. So we're not even, letting people understand that if they are doing physical harm to somebody, they can cause long-term problems, especially within this person's life. So we're kind of acting like violence is meaningless. It's something that you can dish out without any sort of physical harm being done to the other person, without any harm being done to yourself as well. There are those few superheroes who do kill their enemies, such as the Punisher, Moon Knight, and these characters traditionally have no holds bar. It doesn't matter if this is the lowest rung of the criminal ladder, somebody on the street, this person is going to be killed. It does not matter. This violence is just very extreme, and we hardly ever necessarily look at it in the way that it is on the page. And then Jackson Katz talks about in Tough Guys 2, when we talk about violence, we miss how persuasive and interconnected this larger story of manhood is, and how it creates a culture script that says physical toughness, force, and violence are legitimate ways for men to achieve and maintain power and control. A script that men and boys are expected to adhere to, whether they want to or not. So Katz here is more so talking about action films, but this is very, very interconnected with our comic books. We are seeing these characters who are this peak physical fitness, and then also just hyper violent, and we're telling young men and men in general that this is the way that you can get power and control. This is the way you can be the superhero and potentially save the world. This next slide just shows a little bit of comic book violence, just, kind of ignoring the fact that it can be hyper violent. And then here you have the Punisher just a lot of violence within comics. It's something, working at a comic book store, we always try to talk to about parents, and it's almost something that kind of gets pushed off to the side where it doesn't seem like a big deal to them. All right, now I want to talk about women in comics. Superheroes are overwhelmingly male. Males are seen as protectors in U.S. culture, and only men have the balls to lead. This is definitely something you see within comics, as most superheroes are men, and they are the protectors of women and the universe. Women in comics are typically the damsel in distress and or the romantic partner of a featured superhero. When we look at the currently running titles of Marvel and DC, only 14% of the comics at Marvel have women leads, and only about 11% of the titles at DC have women leads. Even in superhero teams consisting of men and women superheroes, women heroes are typically not our leaders. They are the ones who are taking orders from the male superheroes, often in the background, just kind of there. Women are highly sexualized within comics, even when they're starring in their own books. Many of the costumes that women superheroes wear are extremely tight-fitting, often with cleavage showing, and usually in the cut of a swimsuit. They are very, very small outfits most of the time. And then women in comics are not portrayed in the same fashion as men, especially in consideration of their muscles. They appear daintier and skinnier than that extremely muscular thing we see within the men. And the way they're positioned in covers at times is physically impossible for any human, but they make sure to accentuate the butts, the breasts, and the small hips, things of that nature. I'm going to show you some sexualized comics. This one was a huge... People talked about this a lot just because of how tight this particular outfit was for this character. This next photo I'm about to share was actually caused a lot of drama within the comic book community, especially in terms of sexualization of women. This was an actual Spider-Woman cover for her own book, and she's the hero, yet she's just extremely, extremely sexualized here. Scarlet Witch in a very, very small fitting outfit. Here we see a physical body that's not even possible, but just very skinny, and once again, accentuating these specific body parts. And then the Power Girl outfit, which is just very, 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 just very small. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about heteronormativity in comics. I think this has kind of been touched on anyway within my presentation, but roughly 0.05% of both Marvel and DC's currently running titles have homosexual characters or LGBTQIA characters, and these characters are not main characters within the books they appear. They're usually background characters or just kind of there. The bulk of our superheroes have girlfriends, and most of those girlfriends need saving, and eventually they will get married. It happens in many, many comics. And then, as I stated earlier in the slide before, women are often seen as objects that need saving, and mainly by our stereotypical male superhero. And then, once again, LGBTQIA plus characters are increasingly rare within comics, and it's something that's unfortunate. Here's just an example of all of the couples we see within comics. Both of these characters. All of these characters, for the most part, have gotten married. Here you see a young adult book that is very focused on Spider-Man loving Mary Jane, so that's something else. And then, of course, Superman and Lois Lane. And then, who are the creative teams that help keep these sorts of ideals alive? When we examine currently running Marvel and DC books at both companies, at least 90% of the authors and artists writing these books are men. Women, trans folk, Black, Indigenous, people of color are hardly represented in creative teams. And this goes for, there are about 60 to 70 currently running titles at both Marvel and DC. separately. And some of these male authors and artists are on several different books where you could be bringing in a different voice from any of these other diverse crowds, yet we are continuing to employ these men within these positions, and they are continuing the ideals that, superheroes must be masculine, they must be straight, things to this nature. Men are creating these characters and continue to push a superhero narrative that idolizes an unrealistic ideal male and violence. These teams, whether they realize it or not, continue to keep women as characters always in need of saving, and never strong characters who have bodily autonomy to take care of themselves. This transfers into the comic book community. The portrayal of masculinity in comics perpetuates a male-dominated community. Those who are not cis white men are often seen as someone unwelcome in the community and usually don't feel welcomed within the community as well. These people are not represented within the comics and therefore aren't comfortable or accepted within the community. Sometimes when women are accepted into the comic book community, it can feel like it's because their enjoyment of comics is attractive to men. That those women who are accepted into the community are different and edgy than typical women. This lack of women in the community can also lead to predatory behaviors by men within the community, whether those men are comic book creators or just comic book fans. When you don't have anybody else who has the same voice as you or understands, these things, who do you turn to? And as time has gone on, especially recently, we've seen more people come forward and calling out this behavior, especially at Comic-Cons, and asking for more recognition of women being sexually assaulted or being taken advantage of or groomed. There are many different examples of this within the comic book community, unfortunately, and I can't necessarily get into it too deep right now, but I think that it's definitely worth looking at, and I think the comics that we are taking in and the masculinity that we take in definitely adds to that problem. To conclude, the comic book community can feel very hostile for those who are not white and male. The characters that have dominated comic books since their inception have been white and male, creating a community that isn't diverse and in some instances extremely toxic. If we want to foster kinder, less stereotypical male behaviors, we need to move away from superheroes beating up their enemies with no other alternatives. In creating a fuller comic book universe with heroes of all shapes and sizes, with LGBTQIA plus representation, with more women heroes, and with heroes willing to solve problems without violence would be beneficial for both the comic book community and young comic book readers. This is something I just really feel strongly about. I think that if we don't see the characters that are ourselves, we won't feel welcome within these communities. And obviously, it's been created where it is a male-dominated community, and it's been harder for people to break into there if they are not straight white men. This is something I would love to see changed. I'm trying my best as somebody within the comic book community to change this by speaking on these issues as loud as possible. And I think it's important. Thank you for listening if you took the time to listen. I hope you have a great day.